Okay, hey folks, Mark Locklear here, and this is a screencast on Murach Chapter 18, How to Secure a Database. And this is a pretty good chapter. Not going to get too far in the weeds, because I think it's mostly pretty straightforward. You're going to be doing most of your work this week will be done in MySQL Workbench, and I'm just going to have you do some of the book exercises in addition to the My Guitar Shop exercises. But so we'll do that. We'll look at the book. I just got a couple of things I'll spout off on in the book, and then maybe look at, I got a little Linux server management sort of thing. We'll update I noticed my server needed to be updated, so I think it's worth maybe sharing that. Okay, so how to secure a database. So most of this is focused around user accounts. I mean, that's the big one. We talk about securing a database. I will say that there's really two parts. The book doesn't go into that because it's sort of outside the scope of, looking at the database itself, but securing the server, is sort of another big piece too. Now, this is not a Linux administration class. We're doing some Linux administration, and I think that's important. But just keep in mind that there's really, when we talk about security, there's multiple levels of things that you can do. Again, this is specifically the database, but if there are vulnerabilities at the server level or even at the network infrastructure level, then that makes your database sort of insecure too. So I think there's, obviously having the database secure is an important piece, but there are other aspects. I just wanted to sort of mention that piece. So working with users and privileges sort of works through that. I'll say about roles, I think is important. That couple of nice things about having roles already pre-created. Number one, it sort of creates this repeatable, assignable set of rights that you can give to users. And it's, number one, it's way more efficient, but it's also way more secure because you're not doing one-offs each time, right? So I'm going to make something up here, but let's say you have a junior database administrator, or actually, let's say you have a number of junior database administrators, and you want to give them rights to maybe just read writes. Or in fact, I've had this happen before where we were using PHP admin at the time, but we had a number of users who just needed to be able to view the database. So they only had read writes to the database. And, let's say you've got a half a dozen or maybe more users who just need read writes, rather than individually going in and giving, modifying their users to give them rights, creating a role around this. And, you can call the role read only user, and then assign that role to each user who you want to have it. It's just a much more efficient way to assign rights like that. And it sort of takes some of the guesswork, or it takes some of the potential for error out. Maybe when you're assigning rights to a user, you mistakenly give them not just read rights, but also alter rights, or, rights to modify data. If you're assigning it to a role, it's much easier to just say, okay, I'm going to associate a user to a given role, rather and have, again, have those rights encapsulated in that role, and then associate the role to the user rather than modifying each user. The other thing is, if a given role changes, let's say again you have a read only role, maybe it's assigned to one database, but you could also go in and just change the role, and then it's automatically going to update the rights to all of the users who are associated with that given role. So again, let's say that scenario where we've got a half a dozen users or so who have this read write role, and let's say we decide, okay, we want to update this role and maybe give these users more rights or less rights, rather than having to go back and touch each user to make that change. All right, I've got a single place that I can go. All I need to do is modify the role, and then that's going to update that's going to update the privileges those users have got again, rather than having to go back and touch each individual role. They had this section on scripts that sets up users and creates privileges for users. These are super handy to have around. So when you're creating users, and I think we've, at least those of you who had me for DBA 120, it's also handy to just keep these scripts, save these scripts as part of SQL files rather than, I mean, there's always times when you're sort of doing ad hoc work on a server and you may be making modifications, but it's often nice to um, keep these scripts in SQL files, and then you can either copy and paste them into the terminal, or again, if you're working in something like MySQL Workbench, you sort of maintain them there. That way, number one, you're not trying to recreate the wheel each time. You're not trying to recreate the wheel each time. You need to go in and either create a user or modify a user. But then you can also, again, it really lowers the chance of errors as far as doing something you shouldn't do, forgetting to add a particular right or a particular role to a user when you're creating users. So just to think about that. It's handy to keep scripts like this around. And if you modify them, make multiple copies of them, depending on the number of databases you're trying to modify or other things. Have multiple scripts like this that you can quickly go back to and look at. And if you need to modify it or save a new copy of it, it's super easy to do that. Okay, so I think that's all I'll say about the Murach chapter. If you have any other questions, let me know. I think I will log in. Let me log into my server. Show you a couple of things there. So when you're logging into your server, you may see something like this. We're going to update. I think I may have showed you this in maybe one of the opening videos, but if I haven't, again, we use the sudo command to update our server, and then we do apt update. So update doesn't actually update the server. It just updates the library repositories, I think is the right way to say it. I'm a bit outside of my realm here just because I don't do systems administration full time, but I think that's what's going on. So you've actually, the packages, I said a lot, libraries, but the packages have been updated. Again, you could sort of think of them as sort of system files that live, or I guess packages or libraries is the best way to think about it. Those have been updated, but then to actually update the server itself, the actual active files on the server, you do upgrade. Just a note about this, then you'll get something like this. You can just say yes or hit return. Don't updates need to be done, but you just don't necessarily willy-nilly do updates like this. It's not uncommon for things to break when updates get done, specifically when we're talking about Apache, PHP, and MySQL. Anytime those packages get updated, there's always a danger of, when you sort of reboot things when you're done, then things may not come back. Things may not spin back up the way they're supposed to. I had, sort of typical story that I like to tell. I had a server I was maintaining it at one point for a just a little side gig I was doing, and the previous developer had not kept the server up to date. In fact, I planned for it. I did a backup of the database. In fact, did a snapshot of the entire server, and in fact, I planned it like over vacation. I think it was like Christmas vacation. I did it like at 9 o'clock at night because I thought there might be an issue. And sure enough, updated the server. I can't remember. It wasn't the database that broke. I think it was, in this case, it was Ruby on Rails. And there's some middleware called Passenger that just broke when the update happened. It was so out of date. one of the libraries updated, but another one didn't, and there was an incompatibility there, and it turned into a 3 or 4 hour ordeal to bring the server back online. But just know generally when you're doing this, certainly if it's on a production server, back everything up. These days with cloud services like we're using here in Azure or in AWS, DigitalOcean, all of these provide what's called snapshots. Snapshots a nice way to, hey, you're going to get it. You're not just backing up an individual like a MySQL database or a particular thing. You're backing up the entire server, and you're able to restore that entire server also. So, for the class we're doing here, I don't know that it's critical that you do snapshots or backups, but you may want to do it. I mean, if you don't want to lose I mean, if you do an update like this, it wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility that when the update's done, and either when the update's done and or when you go to reboot the server, something could something could go amiss. So just sort of keep that in mind as you're maintaining your server. The other thing I was going to show you is a feature in Linux called top. So you can just run, I'm doing Control C to exit, but it's just top, T-O-P. And it's just an interesting way to see. So what this shows is, I think the top part of it is like the top running processes that are using the most resources float up to the top. So you can see MySQL is one of the big ones here, and that's even though there's like probably, well, there is zero traffic on MySQL right now, it is pulling the most resources. You can see, I mean, the big ones to look at, a lot of stuff to look at here. Usually CPU, the percentage of CPU here and the percentage of memory, those are the big ones you're always looking for, right? How much CPU is being consumed, how much memory is being consumed. So if you ever run a production server, always interesting to use that to, number one, see, this will give you some sense of, how taxing is the particular services or resources that I have running on a server at a given time. Now, this is the pretty, assuming you follow the directions I gave you, we've got a pretty wimpy, for lack of a better word, server here, right? 1 meg of RAM, I think, one virtual CPU. So we've got, I tried to choose sort of the smallest amount of server that we could have just to be able to run MySQL, Apache, and do all the things we need, just so we could keep our costs low. These aren't production servers. Basically, each one of you as a student is going to be the only one that's going to be using the server. So it's trying to keep costs low. So typically you would, but I mean, typically you would see memory, again, it's hard because it depends on the application you're running, how available you want it to be. Typically, you probably on a production server, you wouldn't want to see anything. You could see spikes as high as 20 or 30%, maybe 40%. Typically, you wouldn't want them to get any higher than that. And you notice here, even though this server, again, has basically no activity, I'm not doing anything at all, you're seeing the memory jump to 43% here from time to time. And I'm assuming, it's MySQL that's doing that. So anyway, just wanted to share that. Might be interesting for you to check that out. All righty, I think that is all that I'm going to do for now. Everybody have a great rest of the week, and let me know if you have questions.